Yesterday was the 7th and final round of the Grenke Chess Classic taking place in Baden in southwest Germany. And what a day it was, so many twists and turns. Going into the final round, of course, Magnus Carlsen and Arkadij Naiditsch were level. Carlsen played backhoe today. He had really good winning chances, missed a couple of clear wins, and eventually the game ended in a draw. Carlsen was kicking himself. Naiditsch stood very well against Aronian. Aronian defended brilliantly in a rook and pawn endgame. That also ended in a draw. So Carlsen and Naiditsch still level. Fabiano Caruana could join them in the lead if he defeated Baramidze, the tail ender. But finally he couldn't manage it. He came really close, probably missed a win, but yeah, he only drew the game. The only decisive game today was Michael Adams, who defeated Viswanathan Anand in a very long game. Anand seemed to be drawing a rook and pawn endgame, but threw it away at the end. We've seen that before with Vishy. He cracks in long games. So the final scores: Magnus Carlsen and Arkadij Naiditsch with 4.5 points, Fabiano Caruana and Michael Adams with 4 points, Aronian and Bakro with 3.5, Anand and 2.5, Baramidze on 1.5. So Carlsen and Naiditsch joint first, but they then played 2 tiebreak games to separate them, who would have the glory of first place. 2 10-minute games. Carlsen won the first convincingly. The second, Naiditsch won after a completely mad game, so 1-1. Then they played 2 blitz games, 2 5-minute games. Those were both drawn. Both sides had chances in them, but anyway, both drawn. Then they had a final deciding game, and that's the one we're going to look at. It was a so-called Armageddon game, where one side has more time, but the other has draw odds. So in this game, Carlsen had 6 minutes. Naiditsch had 6 minutes and the white pieces. Naiditsch had 5 minutes, but it meant if the game were drawn, then Naiditsch would win. So a minute less, but draw odds. Carlsen with the white pieces. Let's see how it went. Well, I should say that the legendary Grandmaster Miguel Najdorf once said it's absurd to analyse blitz games, and I tend to agree with that statement. So with that warning ringing in my ears, let's go and let's have a look at it. So, but I'm not going to be too harsh on their mistakes. So Carlsen had white, played an open Sicilian. Okay, that's interesting to see. And Naiditsch played the Najdorf variation. Well, I always like to see that. Carlsen played, I think, for a blitz game, a good continuation. He played g3. It's a really solid move because, okay, Naiditsch played e5, this typical Najdorf pawn structure. Carlsen put the bishop on g2, where it solidly protects the e4 pawn. This pawn often comes under pressure in the Najdorf with moves like b5, b4, and the bishop here, and maybe a knight coming to d7, and sometimes even an exchange sack. But I think the beauty of this g3 system, one could say it's not that ambitious, but actually it's incredibly solid. You know, white does have very good control over these central squares. So let's crack on. A4 from Carlsen, typical squashing move. So in blitz it's all about control, and Carlsen doing that very well, at least in this game. I have to say, in these earlier rapid games and blitz games, neither player was in particularly good form. It takes some time to change gears, to suddenly go from classical chess to blitz chess, and it's only in this final game that you felt that both players were suddenly starting to move a bit quicker. So knight d5, it's an interesting idea. This kind of clears the situation. having got rid of that knight, it also makes room for knight number 2 to perhaps get to d5. I see there's actually a game by Miguel Naiditsch himself where he played rook a7 here and put the rook on c7. And that's certainly not a bad idea. But rook b8 is also fine. Everything going well here, and now h6 looks like a normal move to stop bishop g5. Instead, bishop e6, and here, well, Carlsen seized a chance. Excuse me a moment. He took that pawn on a6. I think Naiditsch was just moving very quickly, actually, and probably just forgot about queen a6. It's not that clear because suddenly there's a threat to play bishop c4. Now, white could fiddle around with moves like this and block it with knight b5. Probably better for white, but, you know, white's pieces look a bit weird. And Carlsen played, at least for a blitz game, I think, an excellent move, a very straightforward move. He brought the queen back and simply sacrificed the exchange. I think even in a classical game, this would be a very decent exchange sacrifice, because white has 2 bishops, and in particular the light squared bishop controls some wonderful squares here. And it's very difficult for black to gain counterplay. You know, this bishop could sit on b5, bishop on e3, maybe white could advance on the king side. Very difficult for black to get any kind of play. Well, Naiditsch realised that, he appreciated that, and broke out straight away with d5 before white got any kind of grip on the position. And then again, well, actually very typical Naiditsch pawn sacrifices. So in blitz, it's all about activity at any cost. Of course, white could take that pawn, and black perhaps could take on d5. Starts to get a bit messy because black's pieces are starting to break out. Carlsen played queen f5, which again in the spirit of this kind of blitz game where you're trying to sort of control things. And the idea is that if g6, then the queen nudges back. Of course, black would very much like to play bishop d6, but then the knight would be en prise. That's why he played the queen to f5 to provoke this move g6. And in this situation, white would have, I think, a very pleasant endgame. So rook b8, rook d8 instead. Bishop f4, so you can see these bishops looking good. And if bishop d6, then knight b5 wins material. So queen c5, rook d1, looking good for Carlsen at the moment, but here Naiditsch probably missed a big shot. g6, this would have kept him in the game, and then knight g4, suddenly there's a tactic on f2. And then white can get out of this with queen d4, but it all gets a bit messy. Who knows what's going on in that position. Anyway, Naiditsch should have tried it. Instead he went queen b4, and suddenly after bishop e5, white has wonderful coordination. Taking here is obviously going to be very, very dubious when this bishop is on the same line. There's going to be some nasty discovered attack. But yeah, I mean, things already quite desperate for Naiditsch. You know, d6 is coming, for example. And the game ended quite rapidly after this. I mean, bishop c5 is not a good move, but it's obviously turned in white's favour. And suddenly white has a checkmating attack. It's very difficult for black to survive this. I was amazed that actually Naiditsch succeeded in keeping going for this number of moves, but obviously his king is getting chased all over the place, and the game ended pretty abruptly. If rook e5, then knight g5, and that that collapses. So king d5, and here Naiditsch resigned. He's now a piece down, and his king is still well, getting mated quite rapidly. So there we go. So Carlsen did succeed in winning the Grenke Chess Classic in Baden, but really only by the skin of his teeth in this final Armageddon game. As I said, it took a long time for the players to somehow get into blitz mode in these final games, and they were so uneven. Also, this game was played at about 1:45 and after an exhausting day's play, so it's hardly surprising that the chess was very uneven. But Carlsen got there in the end. But all in all, well, a very interesting tournament. I think Magnus Carlsen showed in this tournament that he's willing to and interested in exploring new kinds of positions, playing riskier openings like the modern, which didn't work so well against Naiditsch, but was still a very interesting game, and also the Stonewall Dutch he played against Anand. And I get the sense that he really wants to try stuff out and kind of enjoy his chess after thinking about world championship matches over the last year or so. So pretty good performance for him. Naiditsch obviously had an excellent tournament, and he showed that he's a class player. Sometimes, though, he suffers real collapses, as happened in the Qatar Masters Open in November, where he lost a couple of games really badly. So he's a mood player. Sometimes his confidence is up, he plays brilliantly, and the next he can collapse. But he's obviously very strong. Caruana, well, a good result with 4 points. Are the same with Adams. Again, Aronian, only 50%. He's still suffering something of a crisis in form. Next big tournament is Zurich, and that starts on, Friday there's a blitz tournament, and then the game starts in earnest on Saturday. So not long to go before the elite players do battle again. Thanks very much for watching.